It was my birthday, not a milestone one, not the kind with zeros or midlife reassurances, but one that still held weight. The kind of birthday where you're old enough to value presence over presents, and quiet sincerity over curated spectacle. We decided to host it at home. Casual, personal, a night wrapped in familiar laughter and softened by string lights. She helped plan the guest list. Actually, she insisted, "You always forget someone," she teased. "Let me cross-check for you." So I let her, not because I'm forgetful, but because I liked the way she took ownership of little things. The way she made the evening feel not just mine, but ours. The invitations went out, a modest blend of coworkers, college friends, and a few couples we'd grown close to in the past years. Nothing extravagant, just the right number of people to fill a living room without suffocating it. As guests trickled in, the room warmed. There were the usual hugs, the awkward coat pile in the guest bedroom, the clink of early drinks and someone marveling at the candle scent she'd picked. Music played at just the right volume, not loud enough to demand attention, but loud enough to make silences optional. Then he walked in. I didn't recognize him at first. He was just another body by the doorway, tall, relaxed posture, a bottle of wine in one hand and the other raised in a lazy wave. But she did. Her whole body shifted, not visibly, not dramatically, but in that subtle way you only catch when you've memorized someone's posture. Her shoulders pulled in slightly. Her breath caught behind a smile. And then she said it. "Oh my God, you're here?" Her tone was light, curious, a bit too practiced. I looked at her, then back at him. His smile widened. "Didn't think I'd get an invite," he said, handing the wine to whoever was closest. I glanced toward the kitchen. She had been the one in charge of invites. Still, I didn't question it, not out loud. He blended in quickly, greeting a few of our mutual acquaintances with easy confidence. He had the kind of presence people like to be around, relaxed, disarming. He didn't command attention. He just naturally gathered it. She offered to show him where the glasses were. "You remember the layout," she added, laughing too quickly. He laughed back. It wasn't jealousy that nudged my gut in that moment. It was something softer, quieter, an instinct without words. They kept their distance. They didn't hover near each other. But their eyes met more than once. Fleeting glances, long enough to be noticed, short enough to be explained away. She stayed near me most of the night. She laughed at my friends' jokes, touched my arm when I made a toast, even adjusted my collar once with that familiar, intimate grace. But her eyes, they flicked toward him when she thought I wasn't looking. Once, when I turned toward the hallway, I caught his reflection in the mirror above the console table. He was already looking at her. And she, smiling at someone else, still tilted her face slightly, as if sensing the gaze. Was it intentional? Was it habit? I didn't ask, because sometimes silence is easier than doubt. Sometimes, you choose belief like you choose a favorite song, not because it's flawless, but because it's familiar. Later that night, as the crowd grew thinner, he raised a glass toward me from across the room. "Happy birthday, man." I smiled. "Thanks for coming." He nodded. Simple, clean, the kind of exchange that means nothing and everything, depending on what lens you view it through. She refilled drinks. She danced briefly when someone turned up the volume. She laughed more than usual. And every time she passed by me, she touched my back, a reassuring gesture, an anchor. Still, I wondered who she was trying to reassure. Because trust doesn't shout when it breaks. It whispers. And somewhere beneath the music, the murmured conversations, and the click of wine glasses, something began whispering to me. I chose not to listen. Because I always chose to believe her. And belief, like any gift, is never truly free. It costs you something. Sometimes, it costs you the truth. The party settled into its rhythm. Not loud, not raucous, just comfortably alive, the way good gatherings are when the right people show up and no one tries too hard. Laughter flowed, but never pierced. Conversations curled around the room in lazy spirals. Even the music respected the quiet. It was a night that on paper, was everything it promised to be. She floated through it all with effortless grace. She wasn't drinking much, just a glass of wine she barely touched, swirling it more than sipping. But her laugh rang out often, especially when he was nearby. Not too loud, just enough. The kind of laugh that's been rehearsed across years of knowing someone, then tucked away, and now pulled out like a familiar song. They didn't spend the night locked in conversation. That would have been too obvious, too dangerous. Instead, they practiced the art of orbiting, bodies that circled each other without collision. Proximity masquerading as coincidence, familiarity pretending to be politeness. At one point, I saw her lean in to hear something he said over the music. She tilted her head slightly, smiled, laughed, touched her ear. The gesture meant nothing, but I remembered that she did the same thing with me when we first started dating. Used to pretend she couldn't hear just so I'd lean closer. I told myself it meant nothing now, because I wanted to believe it meant nothing. By the time the guests began to thin, the house was dimly lit with the kind of golden fatigue that follows celebration. The scent of warmed food, extinguished candles, and perfume still clung to the walls. People filtered out with hugs, half-whispered promises to catch up soon, and long glances into ride-share apps. The night, like all nights, began to exhale. I stood by the door, waving to the last couple as they disappeared down the path. Behind me, she stacked empty glasses onto a tray with careful precision. "Go up," she said over her shoulder, not quite looking at me. "I'll finish the rest in a bit." "You sure?" I asked. She nodded. "Yeah, it's just a few things. I'll be quick." I hesitated for a second. Not because I didn't trust her, but because something in the room had changed. Not the lighting, not the smell, just the air between us. It wasn't cold, but it had lost its warmth. I kissed her cheek lightly and made my way upstairs. The hallway felt longer than usual. The bedroom too quiet. I loosened my tie, unbuttoned my collar, and sat at the edge of the bed. There was no sound from downstairs. Not even the clink of dishes. I lay back against the pillows, eyes on the ceiling, tracing familiar patterns in the plaster. It was the same ceiling I'd stared at countless nights. The same bed where we'd whispered old dreams. But something in me stirred. A tension without name, a note out of key in a song I'd played 100 times. Trust doesn't announce itself when it wavers. It trembles. It hums. A quiet vibration just beneath the surface, like a string too tightly wound. And that night, it hummed, not loud enough to wake me, but loud enough that I didn't sleep. The morning after, the house was quiet, not the kind of silence born of sleep, but the silence that follows something unsaid, that hangs in the corners like leftover smoke. I woke up early, earlier than usual, the kind of early that comes not from rest, but from unrest. My body stirred before my mind could form a reason. The sun hadn't yet climbed over the trees outside the window. Shadows stretched long and soft across the carpet. She wasn't in bed. I assumed she'd stayed up cleaning longer than she thought. Maybe crashed on the couch. I padded downstairs. No sound, no coffee brewing, no clink of dishes, just stillness, the kind that made me feel like a guest in my own home. I poured myself water, sat by the dining table, and, without quite knowing why, opened the home security app on my phone. I do this sometimes, out of habit, ever since someone stole a package off our porch 2 years ago. I checked the overnight footage, never expecting to see anything. But that morning, there she was, 1:27 a.m., time-stamped, clean, undeniable. The front porch light cast her in a soft orange hue. Her movements were careful, not frantic, not guilty, just measured. She looked left, then right, and then a car pulled into frame. Dark blue. His car, her ex. She didn't pause. She walked toward it with quiet familiarity, opened the passenger door, and slid in. No kiss, no touch, but none of that mattered. Some betrayals aren't made of contact. Some are made of intention. The engine hummed. The headlights cut across the driveway. Then they were gone. She didn't text me, didn't call, didn't come upstairs to say she was stepping out, didn't ask if I was awake. if I needed anything, if I noticed. She just left, and returned, almost 2.5 hours later. 3:52 a.m. Same car, same quiet exit. She stepped out, smoothed her dress, adjusted her hair in the side mirror, and walked back into the house like nothing had shifted. I watched it all from my phone, thumb hovering over the screen as the video replayed, frame by frame. There was no fight, no drama, just a slow erosion of something I used to think was unshakable. Trust doesn't always leave debris. Sometimes, it just disappears, like breath fog fading from a mirror. She was back upstairs when I found her. Face freshly washed, voice light, as if her night had ended the moment mine did. She asked if I slept well. I said yes, because I had no interest in hearing her lie about something she already knew I hadn't seen. But now I had. And the worst part, I wasn't shocked. I wasn't even hurt in the way I thought I'd be. Just confirmed, like finally reading the last page of a book you didn't want to finish, but already knew the ending too. She came down the stairs with a softness that would have once stirred affection. Loose sweater, no makeup, hair tied in the way she always did when she wanted to appear grounded. Approachable, the woman I knew, or thought I knew, had returned from wherever she'd been last night. But she didn't smell like sleep. She didn't carry the stillness of someone who had stayed in. She moved to the kitchen, humming faintly. The song didn't register, one of those tunes without a home. The kind people hum when they need to fill silence with something safer than words. I stood near the counter, coffee already cooling in my hand. When she turned and met my eyes, I asked it without raising my voice. "Did he drive you back?" There was a flicker, barely visible, like a light switch being pressed under the skin. But she didn't flinch, didn't gasp, didn't deflect. She just nodded. "Yeah," she said, almost too casual. "We talked, that's all. I just needed to say some things. To get closure." Closure. The word settled into the room like humidity. Heavy, sticky, impossible to ignore. I sipped my coffee, let it burn. She waited, perhaps expecting the next question to be angry, sharp, explosive. But I had no anger left to throw, only precision. So I asked, "Closure requires how many buttons?" "Exactly." Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. Her eyes dropped, not from shame, but from calculation, from an awareness that the ground beneath her had shifted. And now she had to measure her next step. She didn't apologize. She didn't protest. She didn't even ask how I knew. Because some truths don't need evidence. They exist in posture, in silence, in the way someone returns home and speaks with just enough calm to suggest that their guilt isn't guilt, it's entitlement. "We didn't plan it," she said, almost to herself. I nodded slowly. "But you let it happen." She looked at me again. And this time there was something like offense in her gaze, as if I'd violated the sanctity of her need to explore loose ends. "It wasn't about sex," she murmured. "It was about history, about closure." I laughed softly, but not kindly. History doesn't get rewritten in the backseat of a parked car. She crossed her arms, defensive now, not because she was cornered, but because she still believed her version of the story deserved weight. "You've never understood what he meant to me." That was the moment I knew she hadn't just left the house that night. She had left long before. Maybe weeks, maybe months, maybe even years ago, in all the little moments we both pretended not to notice. I wanted to ask so many things. How long had it been lingering? Who reached out first? Did she think of me at all while stepping into that car? But I asked none of them. Because what good are questions when the person you're asking has already decided their version of the truth is a valid currency? There was no remorse in her tone, no crack in her voice, just a flat delivery of rationale, as if betrayal were a mild inconvenience, as if the part she couldn't explain away was my reaction, not her choice. She returned to her tea, stirred it like we were discussing weather, and I stood there, staring not at the woman I loved, but at a performance she'd grown too comfortable repeating. In her mind, she hadn't betrayed me, she'd revisited something she never really put down. And now that she'd been seen, she was waiting to see how I'd carry the knowledge. But I didn't yell, didn't lecture, Didn't offer her a way to fold herself back into my forgiveness. Because I finally understood. To her, this wasn't a mistake. It was a continuation. And I was the one who'd been interrupting it. She once told me they broke up because their futures didn't align. That was her phrase, clean, elegant, like something borrowed from a therapist's office. We just weren't headed in the same direction, she had said, as if love were a pair of train tracks and she simply boarded the wrong one. It had sounded reasonable back then, even mature. She painted their breakup as something mutual, something conscious, the kind of ending people write songs about where no one's the villain and everyone walks away a little wiser. But last night, they shared a future, not one filled with plans and calendars and bank statements. Not the kind that involves arguments about paint colors and utility bills. A different kind. The kind built in short bursts of electricity. In reopened wounds that masquerade as nostalgia. In breaths shared in confined spaces. Car interiors heavy with old perfume and unspoken words. He gave her a ride. Yes, but what he really gave her was a portal, back into a version of herself she never entirely left behind. And she stepped into it willingly. That's the thing about some histories, they don't die. They lie dormant, like embers hiding under ash, waiting for a breeze. And when the air shifts, when memory meets opportunity, they burn again. She'd always spoken of him with distance, with the kind of careful neutrality that only the practiced manage. It was years ago. We're completely different people now. I believed her, not because her voice was convincing, but because I wanted to believe that love, once dismantled, stayed dismantled, that when a door is closed, it doesn't swing open the moment no one's looking. But some doors don't close. They just wait. And last night, she opened hers, not just for him, but against me. It wasn't the act alone that broke me. It was the timing, the setting, the symmetry. She let him in, emotionally, physically, on the one night meant to celebrate my life. In the house I thought we had built together. In the shadow of guests who toasted our relationship with sincere smiles and full glasses. I think about that now and wonder, did she feel anything? When she looked around the room filled with people who believed in us. Did she feel the weight of her choice? Or was it light for her, effortless, a chapter she thought she could revisit like an old photo album, flip through it, smile, and return it to the shelf, unnoticed? But history doesn't stay still. It leaks, it stains, it grows vines around your present until you're no longer sure what's memory and what's reality. And the worst part, she didn't trip into it. She chose it. She allowed history to come back, not as a guest, not even as a ghost, but as a participant in a night that should have been mine. He walked through my front door and into her past, and she didn't stop him. She let him in with the same ease she once used to invite me into her life. Only this time, I was the one watching from the outside. The birthday candles burned low while the past reignited elsewhere. And I realized, some chapters don't end when you close the book. They end when you stop pretending you were the only one holding it. I didn't scream. I didn't post cryptic messages. I didn't confront him or text friends looking for validation. I didn't burn photos or slam doors. I didn't perform. Instead, I folded a shirt, then another, and another. Slow, deliberate, like a ritual, like prayer, like I was preparing not to leave, but to reclaim, to gather the pieces of myself she had mistaken for hers. The parts one had loaned out in the name of love, now quietly returned to their rightful owner. Me. She sat on the edge of the bed, watching. She didn't ask where I was going, because she already knew, not the location, not the logistics, but the direction, away from the version of myself who kept showing up, even when the other half of us had stopped. I zipped the duffel bag. Not forcefully, no dramatics, just the sound of closure, literal and figurative. She stood. Can we talk? I paused, looked at her, really looked, and I saw someone I used to know. Someone whose face had lived in every photo frame, every saved contact, every emergency contact form. But now, she was a stranger draped in the memory of a love that used to make sense. We have, I said softly. Because we had, not with words, but with choices, with midnight drives and silence in the kitchen and video footage no one needed to explain. She started to cry, quietly, as if the volume of her grief could recalibrate mine. But my tears had already been cried, in private, in the slow erosion of trust, in the 1,000 tiny moments before the big one arrived. I walked to the doorway, then turned. "You were supposed to be my future," I said, "but you kept checking your past for instructions." She didn't speak, not because she had nothing to say, but because there's a kind of guilt that doesn't defend itself. It just sits there, heavy, still, waiting for someone else to carry it away. I didn't. I carried only what was mine. Outside, the morning light had shifted. The street was quiet. Birds sang like it was any other day. And maybe, for the world, it was. But not for me. For me, it was the day I stopped negotiating with someone else's unfinished chapters. She had made a choice. To revisit something I thought was behind us. To step back into a story that no longer had my name on the cover. And I made one too. To leave, not because I hated her, but because I loved myself more than I used to. Because I finally understood that closure isn't always a conversation. It isn't forgiveness or revenge or even understanding. Sometimes, closure is simply a quiet door closing. And the sound it makes is peace. Heartbreaks and pasts don't end because we say goodbye. They end when we stop making excuses for the mistakes they keep inviting. So I closed the door. Not for her, for me.